At 6:42 a.m., my phone buzzed against the metal nightstand in my trailer. The text from my daughter Michelle hit like a wrench to the gut. "Shane's walking me down the aisle at graduation. You can watch from the audience if you want." By noon, I'd blown up every comfortable lie they'd been living. I'm Brady Collins, 38 years old, and for 15 years I've worked the oil fields outside Midland, Texas. Started as a roughneck when I was 23, worked my way up to pipeline supervisor. I know what real work looks like, the kind that leaves grease under your nails and ache in your bones, the kind that keeps the lights on in places like Dallas while you're sleeping in a company trailer, wondering if your family remembers your face. That morning, sitting on the edge of my bunk in the pre-dawn darkness, I read Michelle's text 3 times. Same words, same casual cruelty. She'd typed it like she was ordering coffee, not driving a knife through her father's chest. My 17-year-old daughter, the girl I'd been supporting since she was 2 years old, choosing another man to walk her down the aisle at high school graduation. Shane Murphy. Insurance claims, adjuster. 42 years old, steady paycheck, clean fingernails, and a house in suburbia. The man who'd been playing house with my ex-wife Stephanie and raising my daughter while I was 300 miles away, keeping America's oil flowing through pipelines that stretched across half of Texas. Mr. Reliable, Mr. Always There, Mr. Checkbook Dad. But here's the thing about being Mr. Checkbook Dad. Someone's got to write those checks. And for 15 years, that someone had been me. I didn't reply to Michelle right away. Instead, I walked outside into the Texas heat that starts before dawn and never really stops. The oil derrick light stretched across the horizon like a constellation of industrial stars. This was my world. Metal and machinery, sweat and precision, men who solved problems with their hands and their brains. Because when something goes wrong at 3 a.m, you don't get to call customer service. I lit a cigarette and thought about the last time I'd seen Michelle in person. Christmas, 3 months ago. She'd hug me at the door like she meant it, called me dad like she always had, told me about school and friends and boys she liked. We'd driven around Midland looking at Christmas lights in my pickup truck, just like when she was small. She'd fallen asleep against my shoulder while we sat in the Dairy Queen parking lot, sharing a milkshake and watching families walk by. That was my daughter, the real one, not the stranger who'd sent this morning's text. I pulled out my phone and called Troy Bennett, my drinking buddy and the smartest roughneck I know. Troy's been working oil fields since before I was born, and he's got connections everywhere. Banks, courthouse, city hall, even the IRS. When you work these fields long enough, you learn that information is more valuable than crude oil. Brady? Troy's voice was gravelly with sleep and 30 years of cigarettes. "What's eating you at dawn, brother?" I told him about the text, about Shane walking my daughter down the aisle, like he'd earned that right with 15 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees. About how somewhere along the way, I'd become the ghost who sent checks while another man got to be called Dad. Troy whistled low, that sound he makes when a drill bit hits something unexpected. "That's cold, man. Real cold. What you gonna do about it?" "I'm gonna find out how deep this rabbit hole goes," I said, flicking my cigarette into the Texas dirt. "Shane Murphy's been playing daddy with my money and my family. Time to see what he's really made of. See, here's what people don't understand about oil field workers. We're not just muscle and sweat. We're problem solvers. When a pipeline breaks at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, you don't call customer service. You figure it out, fast, or people freeze. You trace the problem back to its source. You gather your tools, and you fix it with surgical precision. I'd been sending money to Stephanie and Michelle for years. Child support, sure, but also extras. Michelle's braces when she was 13, her used Honda when she turned 16, monthly deposits into her college funds since she was 12. I thought I was being a good father from a distance, keeping my family stable while I earned the kind of money that oil work pays. Good money, the kind that makes sacrifices worthwhile. But somewhere along the way, Shane had slid in with his steady 9-to-5 schedule and his soft hands and his insurance adjuster salary that looked reliable on paper. Suddenly, my money became our money. My daughter became our daughter. My family became his family. And I became the inconvenience who showed up every other weekend and holidays, disrupting the perfect suburban life that my paychecks had built. That morning, staring at Michelle's text in the growing Texas heat, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I hadn't just been supporting my daughter, I'd been financing my own replacement. I walked back into the trailer and sat at the small table where I ate my meals alone and paid my bills. The place was clean, but sparse. Just what a man needs when his real life is supposed to be somewhere else. On the wall hung a picture of Michelle at 12, gap-toothed and smiling, wearing the baseball uniform I'd paid for. Next to it was a photo from last Christmas, the three of us, me, Michelle, and Stephanie, standing in front of the tree in Shane's living room. I'd bought the presents under that tree, but it was Shane's house, Shane's tree, Shane's family gathering that I was visiting like a distant relative. The coffee pot gurgled to life, and I made my first decision of the day. I wasn't going to call Michelle back. I wasn't going to argue or plead or try to convince her that blood trumps convenience. Instead, I was going to do what oil field workers do best. I was going to investigate the problem, gather my tools, and fix it. That morning, I made some calls, the kind of calls that oil field workers are good at making, direct, purposeful, and designed to get information fast. First call, Stephanie's bank in Midland. I still had access to the account where I sent support payments, the joint account we'd set up years ago when we were married and Michelle was small. Amazing what you can learn with a social security number, a worried father's voice, and 15 years of banking history. The customer service representative, a woman named Maria, who sounded like she had kids of her own, pulled up our records without hesitation. "Mr. Collins, I see regular deposits from your account to the Collins family account," she said, typing in the background. "Is everything all right? I need to understand some recent activity," I told her. There have been some unusual transfers. What I discovered made my coffee taste like motor oil. Shane had been making deposits too, but not into Michelle's college fund like I'd been doing for 5 years. He'd been putting money into a joint account with Stephanie, an account I'd never heard of. Small amounts, regular as clockwork, building up what looked like a nest egg while I was funding Michelle's education and expenses. "Sir, there's also been some activity on the college savings account," Maria said carefully. "Large withdrawals over the past year. The balance is significantly lower than it was." I thanked Maria and hung up, staring at the printout she'd faxed to the trailer park office. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers told a story I was just beginning to understand. Second call, Troy's cousin, who works at the courthouse. Darla Bennett has been filing papers and tracking property records in Midland County for 20 years. She owes Troy a favor from when he helped her son get work on the rigs after high school. In small Texas towns, favors are currency, and information is power. "Brady, honey," Darla's voice was warm with recognition. "What can I do for you?" "I need to know about a property purchase," I said. "Shane Murphy bought a house last year on Elm Street." Public records are beautiful things when you know how to read them. Shane had bought the house in March of last year for $185,000. The down payment was $37,000. Almost exactly the amount I'd calculated had been in Michelle's college fund before the withdrawals started. "Anything else you need to know?" Darla asked. "Yeah. When did he buy it exactly?" "March 15th, she said. "Same week as spring break, I remember, because my granddaughter was visiting." Spring break. The week Michelle had gone to South Padre Island with her friends, a trip I'd paid for as an early graduation gift. While my daughter was celebrating on the beach, Shane was using her college money to buy a house. Third call, my buddy Luis at the tax office. Luis and I had worked derricks together 5 years ago before he got smart and took a government job with regular hours and health insurance. He still owed me for covering his shifts when his wife had their second baby. "Brady, man, you don't call unless you need something?" Luis laughed. "What's going on?" "I need to know about tax filings, specifically someone claiming my daughter as a dependent." Luis went quiet for a moment. We both knew this was the kind of favor that could get him in trouble if anyone was paying attention. But oil field loyalty runs deep, and Luis had never forgotten that I'd worked double shifts so he could be in the hospital when his son was born. "Give me a name and social," he said quietly. 20 minutes later, Luis called back. "Brother, you're not going to like this. Shane Murphy has been claiming Michelle as a dependent for 3 years running, filed head of household, claimed educational credits, the whole package. 3 years. While I'd been paying child support, funding college savings, and covering Michelle's car insurance, Shane had been claiming her on his taxes like she was his biological daughter. The educational credits alone were worth thousands, money he'd pocketed while I paid the actual education expenses. I hung up and sat in the trailer's small living room, surrounded by the evidence of 15 years of manipulation, the bank statements, the property records, the tax information. By 10 a.m., I had enough ammunition to level a city block. But I'm not a man who burns bridges for sport. I'm a man who builds things. Pipelines that last decades, structures that withstand Texas weather, solutions that work the first time and keep working. I wanted to understand the full picture before I acted. Wanted to see exactly how deep Shane's deception went. So I called in. Sick to work, first time in 3 years, and drove the 3 hours back to Midland. The highway stretched across West Texas like a ribbon of asphalt through oil country, past pump jacks that nodded their heads like metal birds drinking from the earth. This was my landscape, the place where I'd spent 15 years earning money that another man had been using to steal my family. I pulled into the parking lot of Shane's insurance office at 11:30, just before lunch. The building was one of those new strip mall developments, all glass and aluminum siding that looked expensive but felt temporary. Through the window, I could see Shane at his desk, talking on the phone and laughing at something. He wore a blue button-down shirt and khakis, the uniform of a man who solved problems with paperwork instead of wrenches. I sat in my pickup truck and watched him for 30 minutes. Shane Murphy, 42 years old, soft around the middle, hands that had never been calloused, driving a sedan that got good gas mileage and probably never hauled anything heavier than groceries. This was the man my daughter wanted to call Dad. At noon, Shane emerged for lunch, walking to his car like a man without a care in the world. I followed him to O'Charlie's, one of those chain restaurants with too many TVs and appetizers that cost more than most people's dinner. Shane ordered a Cobb salad and iced tea, pulled out his phone, and spent the meal texting someone. Probably Stephanie, maybe Michelle, possibly making plans for the graduation ceremony where he'd walk my daughter down the aisle. I watched Shane through the restaurant window, this man who'd built a life with my money and my family. He ate his salad with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been caught, never been questioned, never had to explain where the down payment for his house had come from, or why he deserved educational tax credits for a child he hadn't raised from birth. After lunch, I drove to Michelle's high school and waited in the parking lot. Robert Lee High School, home of the Rebels, where my daughter was 3 weeks away from graduating and walking across a stage that Shane would escort her to. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Rebels, fighting for something they believed in against overwhelming odds. At 3:15, students poured out of the building like oil from a cracked pipeline, and there was Michelle. 17 years old, beautiful in that unconscious way teenagers have when they don't know how pretty they are. She wore jeans and a blue t-shirt, carried a backpack that I'd bought her last August, walked with friends whose cars I'd helped pay for through the insurance premiums I covered. I rolled down my window. "Hey, kiddo." She looked surprised, maybe even pleased for a split second, before her face went carefully neutral. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Came to talk about graduation," I said. "About your text this morning." Michelle shifted her backpack from one shoulder to the other, a nervous habit she'd had since middle school. Her friends melted away with the instinctive awareness teenagers have for adult drama they don't want to witness. He's been there, for everything. It feels right. "Has he told you how he's been there?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "With money from your college fund?" The confusion in her eyes was real and immediate. "What do you mean?" I showed her the bank records I'd printed that morning, the transfers, the dates, the house purchase that coincided exactly with the college fund withdrawals. Michelle's face went white as fresh cotton. "He said that was his savings," she whispered, staring at the numbers. "Honey, I've been putting money in that account for your college since you were 12 years old. $300 a month, every month for 5 years. Shane cleaned it out for his house down payment and never told you." Michelle looked at the screen like it was written in a foreign language she was trying to translate. "But Mom said Shane was helping with everything. She said he was being generous." "Shane's being generous with my money," I said gently. "The car insurance you think he pays? That comes out of the child support I send your mother. The cell phone bill? Same account. Your mom's not lying to you, kiddo. She probably doesn't know the details either." My daughter's hand trembled as she held my phone. How much was in there? $18,000, I said. Enough for 2 years at community college or a good start at a 4-year school. Michelle started crying then, and it broke something in me that had been holding together for 15 years. Not the angry tears of a teenager who didn't get her way, but the devastated tears of someone realizing they'd been living in a lie. "I'm sorry, Dad," she sobbed. "I didn't know. I thought Shane was taking care of us." "He was taking care of you," I said. "With my money. There's a difference." I let her cry for a while, sitting in my pickup truck in the parking lot where I'd once watched her play soccer, where I'd picked her up from band practice, where I'd taught her to drive in circles around the empty lot on weekends. Then I told her the rest. "Michelle, Shane's been claiming you as a dependent on his taxes for 3 years. That means he's been getting thousands of dollars back from the government for supporting you, while I've been paying actual child support every month." She looked up at me with red eyes. "Is that illegal?" "It's fraud," I said. "And it means that every time Shane talks about how much he's done for you, he's not mentioning that he's been paid by the government to do it." We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching other kids get picked up by parents in SUVs and sedans. Normal families living normal lives without the complications of divorce and manipulation and financial betrayal. "What are you going to do?" Michelle finally asked. "I'm going to have a conversation with Shane," I said, "and your mother, tonight." "Dad, please don't make this worse." I looked at my daughter, this girl I'd loved since the day her mother told me she was pregnant. This child I'd worked double shifts to support, and I realized something important. She was old enough for the truth. "Michelle, I'm not making anything worse. I'm making it honest. For 15 years, I've been sending money to support you while working oil fields 300 miles away. I've missed soccer games and school plays and probably 100 little moments because I was earning the money that Shane's been using to play daddy. But he loves me too," she said quietly. "I'm sure he does," I said, and I meant it. "But love doesn't entitle him to steal from your future or lie to you about where the money's coming from. Shane gets to be the present, reliable father figure while I'm the guy who shows up every other weekend. But I'm the one paying for that arrangement, and I think it's time everyone knew it." Michelle nodded slowly. Can I think about this? About graduation?" "Take all the time you need," I said, "but I want you to remember something. I didn't fight for custody when your mother and I divorced because I thought you needed stability. I worked jobs that kept me away because they paid enough to give you everything you needed. I've never asked you to choose between Shane and me because I thought that wasn't fair to you." I paused, watching her process this. "But I won't be invisible anymore, and I won't keep paying for a life I'm not allowed to be part of." That evening, I knocked on the door of Shane's house at 7:30, just after dinner time. The house at 412 Elm Street that my daughter's college fund had bought. 2-story brick colonial with a 2-car garage and a lawn that somebody had put time into maintaining. A house that looked like the American dream, built on stolen money and buried truths. Shane answered the door in khakis and a polo shirt, looking like he'd just stepped out of an insurance company brochure. When he saw me standing on his doorstep, his face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked like fear dressed up as annoyance. "Brady, what are you doing here?" "Came to talk," I said, "about graduation, and money, and lies." Shane glanced over his shoulder toward the living room, where I could hear the television playing, and Stephanie's voice calling something about who was at the door. "This isn't a good time," Shane said, trying to close the door to a crack. I put my boot against the frame, not aggressively, just firmly. "It's the perfect time, Shane. Where's Stephanie?" "Inside," he said quietly, resignation creeping into his voice. "Good. She needs to hear this too." Stephanie appeared behind Shane, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 41, she was still beautiful in the way that had caught my attention 20 years ago, when we were kids working summer jobs and thinking we knew what forever meant. Her hair was shorter now, styled in a way that cost money I'd probably paid for through child support. She looked genuinely happy to see me, which made what came next harder. "Brady, this is a surprise. Come in, come in." Shane stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into the living room I'd been helping to furnish for years, without knowing it. Nice furniture, big TV, family photos on the mantle showing Shane and Stephanie and Michelle at various gatherings and vacations. A perfect suburban life, financed by oil field money and tax fraud. "Can I get you something to drink?" Stephanie asked, playing hostess like this was a social call. "This isn't a social visit," I said, pulling out the manila folder I'd been carrying. "We need to talk about money, specifically where Shane's been getting it." I set the folder on the coffee table and opened it. Bank records, property documents, tax information, all spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Shane's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Brady, I don't know what you think you found, but I found the truth," I interrupted. "Stephanie, did you know that Shane used Michelle's college fund as the down payment for this house?" Stephanie looked confused. "What college fund?" "The one I've been paying into for 5 years. $300 a month every month into an account specifically designated for Michelle's education. Shane cleaned it out last March." Shane tried to jump in. "That's not $18,000, I continued, looking at Stephanie. "Gone. Used to buy this house while you both told Michelle that Shane was being generous by supporting the family." Stephanie's face went through the same progression. Shane's hat at the door. "Shane, what is he talking about?" Shane's composure finally cracked. "It's complicated, Steph. Brady wasn't contributing enough for Michelle's real needs. I was covering everything else, so I thought—" "You thought you'd steal from my daughter's future to buy yourself a house," I said, "and then claim her as a dependent on your taxes to get thousands back from the government while I paid actual child support." The silence that followed was thick as crude oil. Stephanie stared at Shane like she was seeing him for the first time. Shane looked like a man who'd been caught with his hand in the till and was trying to figure out which lie might still work. "Stephanie," I said gently, "show me your tax returns from the last 3 years." She disappeared upstairs and came back with a folder of documents. I spread them out on the table next to the bank records. There it was, clear as daylight. Shane claiming Michelle as a dependent, claiming head of household status, claiming educational credits for expenses I'd been paying. "I didn't know," Stephanie whispered, staring at the papers. "Shane, you told me you were just helping organize our finances." Shane stood up, pacing to the window like a trapped animal looking for an exit. "I was helping. Brady was never here. Michelle needed a father figure who was present, not just someone who sent checks from 300 miles away." "That's true," I said. "Michelle did need a father figure who was present, but she also needed someone who was honest, someone who didn't steal her college fund to buy himself a house." "I was going to pay it back," Shane said desperately. "With what money?" I asked. "The tax refunds you were getting for claiming her? The money you saved by not actually paying for her expenses because I was covering them through child support." Stephanie was crying now, not the angry tears of a woman being confronted, but the broken tears of someone, realizing how completely she'd been deceived. "Shane, how could you do this?" she asked. "I did it for us," Shane said, turning from the window. "For this family, Brady abandoned you both. I stepped up." "You stepped up with my money," I said. "Every month for 15 years, I've been sending support while working oil fields to make sure Michelle had everything she needed. You didn't step up, Shane. You stepped in, and you used my work to finance it." Shane's face flushed red. "You think because you write checks, that makes you a father? Michelle barely knows you. I'm the one who helped with homework, who drove her to friends' houses, who did all of that with money I earned," I finished. "Shane, I'm not saying you haven't been there for Michelle. I'm saying you've been there with my financial support, while taking credit and tax benefits for it." I stood up, gathering the papers back into the folder. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to restore Michelle's college fund," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "Every penny with interest, $18,000 plus whatever it would have earned in a savings account over the past year." Shane started to protest, but I held up my hand. "You're going to amend your tax filings for the past 3 years and stop claiming my daughter as a dependent. You're going to pay whatever penalties the IRS charges for fraudulent claims, and you're going to do it quietly, without involving Stephanie or Michelle in the legal consequences." "You can't prove anything illegal," Shane said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Shane, I don't need to prove anything illegal to the police," I said. "I just need to prove you're a liar and a thief to the people who matter. Michelle already knows. Stephanie knows now. The bank knows, and the IRS will know by tomorrow morning." I pulled out my phone and showed him a text from Michelle that had come in while we were talking. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you told me. Can we meet tomorrow to talk about graduation? The look on Shane's face was worth 15 years of working double shifts while another man played house with my family. Stephanie spoke up then, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. Shane, is this all true? The college fund, the taxes, everything? Shane tried one last desperate play. Steph, you know how much I love you both. I was trying to build us a stable life. Brady was never here when you needed him. With Brady's money, Stephanie said quietly. You built our stable life with his money while lying to me about where it came from. It's more complicated than that, Shane said. No, I said. It's exactly that simple. For 15 years, I've been working oil fields to support my daughter, while you've been using that support to build yourself a family. You didn't step up, Shane. You stepped in between me and my daughter and made yourself the hero of a story I was writing with. My paychecks. I stood up and looked around the living room one more time. You can keep the house, Shane, but you're going to pay for it honestly from now on, and you're going to explain to Michelle why the man she wanted to call Dad stole from her future to buy himself a front yard. 3 days later, I met Michelle at Dairy Queen, the same place we'd shared milkshakes when she was small. She looked older somehow, like the conversation in the school parking lot had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Dad, I'm sorry, she said before I could even order. I didn't understand what was really happening. Nothing to apologize for, kiddo, I said. You were living in the world the adults around you created. It's not your fault that world was built on lies. We sat in a corner booth with chocolate milkshakes, and Michelle told me about the conversation she'd had with Stephanie the night before, about how her mother had confronted Shane, about the shouting that followed, about Shane's desperate attempts to justify what he'd done. Mom filed for divorce yesterday, Michelle said quietly. How do you feel about that? I asked. Confused, she said honestly. I mean, I love Shane. He has been there for me, even if it wasn't the way I thought. But I keep thinking about all the times you missed because you were working to pay for things he was taking credit for. Michelle, I want you to understand something important, I said. I don't hate Shane for being there when I couldn't be. I hate that he lied about how he was able to be there. She nodded, stirring her milkshake with the red plastic spoon. Dad, about graduation, whatever you decide is fine with me, I said, but I want you to decide based on truth, not on lies about who's been supporting you all these years. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of her mother at the same age. Will you walk me across the stage? I'd be honored, I said. 2 weeks later, I watched my daughter graduate from Robert Lee High School. I walked her to the stage in the same black suit I'd worn to my father's funeral, and when they called her name, Michelle Collins, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like I belonged in my own daughter's life. Shane was there, sitting in the back with the other divorced parents and distant relatives. We nodded at each other when our eyes met. No hostility, no drama, just the acknowledgement between two men who'd both loved the same girl, even if one of us had loved her with stolen money. After the ceremony, Michelle hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for all the work you did that I never knew about." "That's what dads do," I said, and for the first time in 15 years, I knew she understood what that meant. I went back to the oil fields the next week, but something had changed. I still worked the same long hours, still sent money home every month, but now it felt different. Now when I sent money for Michelle's college expenses, I knew exactly where it was going. And when Michelle called me Dad, I knew she meant it. Shane kept the house on Elm Street, but he lost everything that mattered. The college fund was restored within 30 days, and the amended tax filings cost him nearly $6,000 in penalties and interest. Stephanie moved out with Michelle and rented a small apartment closer to town. Me? I kept working the oil fields because that's what I know how to do. But now when I come home every other weekend, I'm not visiting someone else's life. I'm living my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't burning everything down. Sometimes it's just turning on the lights so everyone can see what was really happening in the dark. Shane Murphy learned something about oil field workers that day. We might work with our hands, but we're not stupid. We solve problems methodically, and when you mess with our families, we don't get mad. We get even, and we make sure everyone knows exactly what even looks like.